Willow. Chapter 13. Lessons in History. Making peace with someone is not the same thing as becoming friends with them. If you've ever held a job, you know what I'm talking about. Coworkers aren't required to be your friends. It's expected that they'll be polite and civil, but there's no guarantee of even that. But there is an expectation of certain behavior. Even if you have fundamental disagreements, the socially acceptable thing to do is to put those aside to avoid friction. Making peace. That's what I did with Thomas Sinclair. The thing about making peace that we sometimes don't think about is the concessions that come with it and the patience required to maintain them. A tracking spell? We've been sitting at the counter of the Willow for hours now. First, it was a homecoming. Seeing my friends and assuring them that Thomas was fine. To some, it just meant that whatever temporary insanity had taken hold of them was now gone. To others, it was a sign that I'd fixed my mistake. Regardless, after the scene he'd made, walking through the front door together with Thomas was good for business. His voracious devouring of half a dozen assorted pastries an even stronger endorsement. All in all, it was a good afternoon, and even though we hadn't spent any time getting our stories straight, Thomas didn't say a word about the enchanted cake and cookies. That is, until there were only a handful of us left in the Willow. No such thing, I answer.
Enchant an owl and have it search the woods?
This is what discussing how to find Fred and Petunia has been like now that Thomas knows I dabble somewhat in magic. You know you could just buy a drone and do the exact same thing, right? I barely have a concept of what's possible here in Willow when it comes to the supernatural. I'm an amateur, if that, and I've seen some incredible things, but I've yet to see any real magic performed. No wizard has conjured up a fireball, and no sorcerer has made a rabbit disappear before my eyes. And as the sole witch in town, the only thing I use a broom for is to clean the floors at the end of my shifts. No flying through the sky, casting a silhouette over the full moon for me. For Thomas, however, the idea that someone who can make magic healing cakes can't also draw a circle on the ground and simply summon the missing seems incomprehensible.
Ghosts!
He exclaims. No. I have no idea what he wants with ghosts, but considering previous experiences, that's not something I even want to contemplate.
You could ask a ghost or spirit to find them for us.
It doesn't work that way.
How does it work, then?
I stand abruptly and scan the dining room. It might as well be empty. Old man Bedar's nodding off behind a book of quantum mechanics, but otherwise, the Willow is ours and ours alone. Wait here. It takes a few minutes for me to make the trip, but when I walk back down from the apartment, Thomas's eyes light up with a level of wonder felt only by the very young when in the presence of unlimited ice cream. I drop the heavy tome on the counter, letting it boom to show its weight. The sound stirs old man Bedar awake. He looks around and grumbles, putting his coat on before leaving, casting a baleful look behind him. He'll be back. Meanwhile, Thomas is tracing his finger on the leather cover of the book. His level of reverence is what I'd expect from an archaeologist studying the texture of a one-of-a-kind fossil. You'd think he's worried the whole thing will turn to dust if he puts too much pressure on his fingertip.
Is that?
He whispers. It's a recipe book. I grab a random bookmark and flip the thing open. Okay, maybe not so random. I picked one of the colorful ones with the pressed flowers and pretty tassels. A safe-looking page. Butter pretzels. There are glyphs on the side of the page, a quickly scribbled message in the margin, and, of course, a rough sketch of the plumpest, fattest pretzel you've ever laid eyes on. But above all else, it's a list of ingredients and steps for preparation.
I don't understand,
Thomas says. This is the magic at my disposal, I explain. Honey cakes, meat pies, roasts, and soups. The tools in my arsenal are small miracles, Thomas. There are no grand rituals and summoning circles. I wear an apron and wield a spoon, not a cloak and a wand. Gently, he picks up the corner of the page and lifts it, flipping to the next recipe. No bookmarks for this one, but I recognize Doris's handwriting. Breadsticks. I expect Thomas to be disappointed. This isn't the sexy magic that makes for a good podcast episode. I don't think anyone will want to listen to him talk about magic pretzels for very long before they demand more Bigfoot sightings and UFO video breakdowns. That would suit me fine. The more boring this seems to the audience of Stranger Limits, the less of a spotlight will shine on Aquilo. Instead, he looks intrigued, as if the absence of spectacle was just as intriguing a mystery as the magic itself. I guess that's the mind of a conspiracy theorist at work. The ability to look at a situation and find just as many questions in the holes between the information.
Those look really good,
he murmurs, flipping yet another page. Garlic rolls, written down in expressive cursive with an ink that's almost been swallowed whole by time. Melody or Madeline, one of the very old Dufour witches. That page Thomas Sinclair is salivating over is probably older than the U.S. Constitution. It's a wonder the paper isn't more damaged and fragile.
Yeah, they do,
I say, giving a quick look at the ingredient list. Wild garlic and fleur de sel. The ground pepper must have been an incredible luxury at the time.
So,
Thomas pushes back from the counter and away from the book before he's completely consumed by its content.
What do we have?
I close the book with a little more reverence this time, sliding it aside so it's far from the glasses of orange juice and coffee mugs. 2 disappearances in apparently similar circumstances, 2 days apart.
One set of parents are pilvists, the others are not,
he adds. Neither the Ashtons or the Marshalls showed any sign of having a conflict with their children, and everyone seems to agree that there hasn't been any other disappearance like this before. Thomas scratches his pale stubble.
What about other disappearances?
He asks. There have been others. Last year. I pause, looking at him, almost daring him to ask what happened. I can see behind his eyes and in the way he works his jaw. He's trying to read me the way a toddler tries to read a newspaper, mouthing words he doesn't understand under his breath, hoping that they'll make sense if given voice.
Unrelated?
He asks, the effort of not digging deeper evident in his strained features. Unrelated. He bites his lip, a physical expression of containing whatever follow-up is bubbling through his mind. He eyes the recipe book.
And we don't know where the lights come from,
he says. Not a question, a statement, adding that particular fact to the pile of evidence we're compiling. Because, last time he checked, that was the answer. Well, I start, my fingers making their way to the string on my apron, toying nervously with the knot. That's no longer exactly true. Sparkling excitement in Thomas's eyes as he turns from the book to give me his full attention once more makes it pointless to even voice the question. Madeline Dufour, one of my ancestors, summoned the Donselites, I say. She did so for her granddaughter.
Madeline Dufour, you say?
Grandmother of Elaine Dufour, who was the grandmother of Philomene Dufour, my great-great-grandaunt. Thomas lets out a long, low whistle. I can't blame him for being awestruck. That's a long stretch of history separating us from the woman who first conjured the Donselites. His eyes narrow and his smile widens with mischief. He leans in as if about to lay down a confession of his own.
Wait,
he says.
I thought you said you didn't do any fancy magic.
He takes the recipe book, sliding it back between us with none of the care and reverence he used prior. His bandaged hand comes to rest on the cover, finger twitching slightly over the worn leather.
What if the spell or recipe to summon the lights is in here, hidden in the margins?
I reach out, take him by the wrist, and lift his hand off my book. Putting it down again on the counter, I pick up the grimoire and this time slide it on a shelf behind the counter. I've gone through this book from cover to cover, I explain. I won't claim to know what every single recipe does, or even that they all have a specific magical purpose, but I'm sure I would have noticed a cream of mushroom soup that summons spectral lights every fall. His smile isn't wiped out by my disappointing explanation as I thought it might be. I'm shooting down his idea, yet the sparkle in his eyes seems to only shine brighter. Excitement in Thomas Sinclair isn't something I'm ever glad to see. What? I ask, wary.
When you baked those German cookies, did you know what they would do to me?
The result of what my Pfeffernussen did to Thomas was born of a powerful intent, but not a willful one. As far as I can tell, while the recipe was certainly one that played with the ingredient of anger and vengeance, I didn't follow it to the letter, and I made the cookies without planning any effect. Yet the impact was immediate, violent, and targeted.
I did not. Then maybe the recipe in the book and the one used to summon the lights aren't exactly the same either.
Sit. Helen Edna, Notary Public, is in as chipper a mood as I can expect her to be. Not that I've never seen her genuinely happy. She has her moments. However, usually, the more jovial she is, the more mysterious she becomes. Her private life is indeed so private that I've never really been sure what hobbies and activities bring Helen joy. Aside from her work, that is. When Helen is all business, those who know her best can feel comfortable assuming she's happy. Today, she's all about the work. I can tell that by how full yet immaculate her desk is. Piles of neatly stacked papers line the front edge like the wall of a fortress protecting her from the noisy, bothersome real world. The cup in which she keeps her pens, the one with the cartoon cat that says, "Can't wait for Catterday," sits empty, the contents arrayed next to her keyboard. The smell of glass cleaner and black coffee float through the air like the perfume of efficiency. Whatever it was Helen was preparing to tackle before I came in, she was ready for it. "Thanks for seeing me," I say with sincere gratitude. I know how much she hates to be bothered without an appointment. "Not at all," she lies. "What can I do for you?" I take off my coat and fold it over the back of the chair as Helen sits on her side of the desk. The way she's eyeing me, I can tell she was hoping this wasn't going to be a take-our-coats-off type of meeting. "Madeleine Dufour," I say, hoping the name makes my taking up her time at least a little more interesting. "What about her?" "I need information about her." Helen leans back in her chair, folding her fingers together. I'm not sure if I've piqued her interest or reached the outermost limits of her patience. Madeleine Dufour is a big ask. Over 2.5 centuries separates us from the woman. She's long dead and buried, but worse, was a secretive person when she was alive. Obviously, no one has any living memory of her. Hell, I'd be hard-pressed to find someone who'd met Philomene in the flesh. Perhaps Doris might have known a few things about her ancestor. Lore passed down from one generation to the next as one woman left the Aquilo Cafe to her successor. If that was the case, the chain was broken with me, leaving the secrets of the Dufour witches in the dust of the past. And what makes you think I would be privy to any special information about Madeleine? I look around the minimally decorated office. Apart from a few plants and the rare piece of whimsy like her pen cup, the only things in the room are 3 large black metal file cabinets. The offices of Helen Edna, Notary Public, have a total of 5 rooms. The other 4 are a small water closet, a supply room with a photocopier, mini fridge, and microwave oven, and the 2 other offices, each filled with more black file cabinets. "Records," I answer. "You keep records of everything. You're by far the most organized person I've ever met. If information were magic, you'd be more of a witch than Doris." Helen grants me one of her rare smiles. Of anyone I've met or heard of in Aquilo, Doris is the only person for whom I know Helen to have shown so much respect and friendship, enough to extend beyond my great-grandaunt's passing. Being compared to Doris must be a high compliment indeed, or at least I hope it is. "I can't conjure records out of thin air," she says, letting the ephemeral smile melt away. "No, but what you don't have, you know where to get." Slowly and carefully, as if explaining something to a child, Helen leans forward. "Maybe, but what if the records don't exist anywhere? Madeleine Dufour was a long time ago. A lot's been lost since then. I can't just look her up on the internet." If there's nothing, then there's nothing. Lack of information is a type of information. The observation seems to catch Helen by surprise. It's an art principle, negative space. When something isn't there, it can be used to draw or suggest the shape of things that are. Maybe I can't find what I'm looking for about Madeleine and the other Dufour witches, but with a bit of luck, The empty places will offer up clues of their own.
Is this about those 2 kids that went missing?
They're my age, I say, trying to remind her and myself of that fact.
You heard about that?
Aaron told me you plied him with food in exchange for some tips. I'm guessing they haven't been much help.
No, and neither was Detective Wilson.
She nods in agreement. Agreement to what? I'm not sure. Probably that Aaron Wilson is oftentimes of little help.
Let's hear it then,
she says.
What do you think I could know that would help? Sales records,
I say, gauging her interest as I speak.
You took care of Doris's affairs after she passed, so you must know something about how she handled supplies to the Aquilo before I took over. Is there any chance we can trace back purchases all the way to Madeline?
Helen releases a noise I didn't think she was capable of. It's bubbly but cruel, amused but barbed. It hits me that I've never really heard Helen laugh before. I don't like it.
You want me to pull up the receipts of transactions from 270 years ago? Miriam, that's as impossible as an Aquilo tree.
I should probably be getting used to dead ends by now. Whenever I want to dig back, I hit a wall. People and circumstances do not want me looking and learning the history of my predecessors. I turn my head to look behind me, and a hand invariably slaps itself over my eyes. My frustration must be writ in obvious letters across my face because Helen's laugh cuts short. She lets a little bit of silence hang between us before she sighs.
Why would you want to know that anyway?
I, too, sigh, but the breath is released out of desperation and not resignation. This is pointless, but also one of the last avenues open to me. Thomas went to see what he could learn by calling a few friends, which doesn't inspire much hope, but at least keeps him out of my hair until I need him again. If I can't pull this thread, I might have to go to Wilson or Lamore and leave the disappearance of Frederick Ashton and Petunia Marshall to the authorities, in effect accepting that they are most likely gone forever.
I'm trying to figure out how Madeline summoned the Donselites.
Helen's gaze drops to her desk, traveling its length as if she was looking for something she might have lost on its immaculate surface. Her pupils twitch, and her eyebrows knit themselves as an expression of her intellectual effort.
You're looking for ingredients, aren't you? Whatever it was that Madeline might have used?
Yes, that's exactly it. I can't mask my enthusiasm. Does Helen have an idea where I might find this information? Does she have, somewhere in one of those forbidding black cabinets, a folder with dusty old records that could hold the answers to my question? Is there a moldering box filled with papers on the brink of falling apart, covered with items and prices I could pore over to learn what I need to learn?
You won't find that anywhere. That's just not information that anyone would have kept.
Way to pop my bubble, Helen.
What you might be able to get your hands on, however, are historical records for the time. If there was a festival or event around the time of the first Donselites, you might find some of the information you're looking for that way.
It's a stretch. Coming from just about anyone but Helen and maybe Olivia, I dismiss the suggestion as grasping at straws. But while she's no historian herself, Helen is as meticulous as they come, and not one to tolerate a wild goose chase. In fact, if I were a betting woman, I'd wager this is a road she's driven down herself. I couldn't even begin to guess as to why, but I feel fairly sure about it.
Okay,
I say, struggling to keep my hopes at a reasonable level.
Where do I get Aquilo historical records?
Well, Helen says, rearranging her pens from the left side of her keyboard to the right side.
Where did you learn that Madeline was the one to conjure the Donselites? Neither Olivia nor I knew that part of the story, so I expect you had a source we never got to enjoy.
My lips press together, and I can feel my teeth clench hard enough to crack walnuts. My hands grip at the arms of the chair with a hold that could only be described as desperate. I'd challenge even Gulliver to pry my fingers off the leather in my grasp at this very moment.
Right,
I hiss, struggling to release my jaw.
That.
I'm sure Mayor Lagacé will be thrilled to see me again.
Business hours are over, Ms. Dufour.
If anything, I'll never be accused of not having an instinct for the obvious. Thomas and I weren't even halfway down the long corridor of City Hall when Mayor Veronique Lagacé spotted us, one hand on the handle of her office and the other turning the keys in the lock. Opposite her, a mirror image, Mayor Byrne is doing the same thing. The two mayors are always dressed similarly, but with minor distinctions. Both are wearing knee-length pencil skirts that stick out from thick wool coats and cover thin nylons. Even the color of their accoutrement is nearly indistinguishable, one being black and the other a deep indigo. The only obvious difference is how Mayor Byrne's boots are a glossy, luxurious black leather, and Mayor Lagacé's are a bark brown suede. They're separated by the blade of the sword hanging on the wall, and each seems almost represented by the soapstone statuettes of a fox and a bear. While Lagacé is the one who calls out her forbidding announcement, the conviction of a concrete wall behind each word, it's Byrne who scares me most. A quick glance at her gloved hand reveals two fingers sticking motionless out from her closed fist, and she turns her whole head to allow her one good eye to see Thomas and me. Mayor Byrne has been through some things. In spite of her wounds, it's not too difficult to imagine her grabbing the sword off the wall and, with a flourish, adopting a battle stance that would freeze the blood of the boldest criminal. Or demon. But it's Veronique Lagacé's warning about her counterpart that sticks with me most. That, of the two, it's she who's the most tolerant of the Dufour women. Coming from the mouth of an admitted witch and demon hunter, it's a scary thought.
City Hall is closed for the night,
Lagacé continues, slipping her keys in her purse.
Compris?
Why is it that, when this woman uses French, it sounds like my mom scolding me?
Oui,
I answer before catching myself.
I mean, yes, but this is important. I'm the mayor, Miriam. I expect business brought to my attention to be important. What you have to ask yourself is it after business hours important?
Damn, woman. How do you get elected with that attitude? It's not like I imagine her to have biannual closing of the Hellgate as part of her platform. And again, who runs against her? Come to think of it, what do I even know about the political landscape of Aquilo? A boring problem for another boring time.
I just want to ask a few questions. It might help to find Frederick Ashton and Petunia Marshall,
she interrupts.
We've been through this, and I'm in no mood to revisit the issue at this time.
Why is she being so difficult? Meanwhile, Mayor Byrne is standing quietly, a little like a trapped squirrel. To one side is the locked door to her office, to the other, her counterpart, and in front of her are Thomas and me blocking her exit. She almost looks sheepish, clutching her own purse, both eyes, real and glass, scanning the surroundings that should be familiar. Is it pity telling me to give up and let these women pass and go about their night? While I'm more than ready to go a round or two verbally with Mayor Lagacé, I'm starting to feel a little bad for her counterpart.
We're here to talk about history,
Thomas pipes up. While I may have been the one to ask him to come along, and with good reason, as he seems preternaturally skilled with making friends and getting on people's good side, and he's a convenient eyewitness if Lagacé decides to act on her witch hunter threat, hearing him is still difficult.
And you are?
Mayor Lagacé's voice cuts the air like a knife made of frost. The pure threat of her question, though addressed at Thomas, feels like dropping through a sheet of ice and into a dark lake in the dead of winter. I hate to admit it, but I might have taken a step back. But not Thomas Sinclair. I don't know if being oblivious and incapable of reading a room could be considered a superpower under any circumstances, but if it can, that would make the host of Stranger Limits a bona fide superhero. Except, I know that's not the case. I've seen Thomas be acutely aware of the social circumstances he was navigating, which leads me to wonder. Regardless, the deadly edge of Mayor Lagacé's words doesn't seem to register with him, and his smile only widens at the question.
Thomas Sinclair,
he says, stepping forward while reaching into his coat pocket with his bandaged hand.
Host of the Stranger Limits podcast.
Bound yet nimble fingers flip a couple of business cards face up for the mayors to take. Part of me thinks I'm about to witness Thomas getting cut down by two women in pencil skirts and high-heel boots. How am I supposed to explain that to Gulliver? Or should I call him Ghost Moose now? But the more observant and reasonable part of me knows that what I'm watching is like meeting like. Politicians and journalists are just two sides of the same people-pleasing coin. Like bakers and confectioners, different but similar. Both mayors pick a card, Lagacé treating the small piece of cardboard with apprehensive care, as if it were equal measures fragile and dangerous. Byrne is different. She holds the card to one side so she can get a good look with her real eye. She smiles, clearly amused by the image of the Bigfoot under the UFO's light. She gets the joke on a level I, or Lagacé, don't. It's not the amusement of Gulliver either, but something a step removed. It hits me. She's seeing this from beyond the fourth wall, from the same place as Thomas Sinclair himself, but further. She has his sensibilities towards the subject, but couched in certainties only a true resident of Aquilo can bring to the table. "A podcast?" she asks, very much amused. "Like a internet radio show," Thomas explains. "Oh, I know. I've just never met anyone who hosts one of them. I have a niece in Montreal who listens to nothing but true crime podcasts." "Can't say I blame her," Thomas adds. "Some of the best and most popular podcasts are true crime." "Should I bother asking what topic you discuss on your show, Mr. Sinclair?" Marie Belle Byrne holds up the business card with her good hand, tapping on the Bigfoot with her thumb. She seems to share none of the apprehension and worry Lagacé or I have felt talking to an admitted fan of the paranormal. In fact, instead of trying to shut him down and get him to move along, she's engaging him. "I'm a fan of the secret and unusual, the things that fascinate us, but we either can't admit to ourselves can exist or are too scared to ask about. The myths under the myths, the reality once the veil of—" "All right," I interrupt. "We get it." I think I'm saving Byrne from the lengthy explanation, and from the corner of my eye, I can see that if I hadn't interrupted, it would have been Lagacé who did, but I'm wrong. Judging from the disapproving look Mayor Byrne gives me, it's obvious I'm the one who's out of line. "And you're curious about Aguilo's history," Byrne goes back to Thomas. I'm starting to form some doubt as to Mayor Lagacé's description of her counterpart as being the one I should be worried about. In fact, I'm beginning to think that maybe if I'd gone to Marie Belle first, I might have gotten more answers, faster, and without the veiled threat on my life. Mayor Byrne digs into her purse, pulling out her keychain and walking towards Thomas and I. We part to let her through as she beckons us to follow. We're taken to a small conference room that Byrne unlocks for us, switching on the lights and waving at the leather chairs that surround the table. There's a whiteboard and a television mounted on the wall. Blue and green felt marker diagrams outline the complex but ultimately boring flowchart for snow removal in Aquilo. While I stand around awkwardly, Thomas pulls a seat out for himself and sits down, fumbling to take out one of his notepads and pens. "You don't have to stay if there's something you need to take care of," Byrne tells her counterpart as she takes off her coat. "I can handle this." "No," Lagacé answers with a growl. "I'll stay." "Suit yourself." Byrne gestures to the chair so I'll sit down before she addresses Thomas. "Now, Mr. Sinclair, what part of Aquilo history would you like clarified? I hate to sound like I'm bragging, but I'm a bit of an expert on the subject." As if giving up, Mayor Lagacé takes off her coat and drapes it over one of the chairs before sitting down. Then, speaking directly to me, like we're suddenly on the same team, she says, "Might as well make yourself comfortable, Ms. Dufour. MB studied history at university. We could be here a while." Stefan knows how to close the cafe. Most of my inventory is ready for the morning. I sigh and take off my own coat, emulating Lagacé before sitting down. This won't be as expedient or as efficient as I would have liked, but I have a feeling that even though it involves listening to perhaps hours of Thomas Sinclair, this process has a better chance of yielding results than my prior conversation with Mayor Lagacé. As I listen, though, I do notice something about the dynamic between the mayors. The way Veronique surveys the room, her eyes flitting from Thomas to Marie Belle to me. She's like a hawk. No, like a tigress, watching as her cub interacts with potential predators. Lagasse wasn't keeping me away from her counterpart for my safety. She was doing it to safeguard her friend. Aquilo is written by J.F. Dubow and narrated and produced by me, Amy Frost. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast platform. Want to support the show? Buy us a coffee. Go to ko-fi.com/Aquilo to donate. Aquilo has a Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Aquilo for details. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram under the username Aquilo.